Whispers from the front North Korean defectors in Ukraine? The war in Ukraine has been a relentless torrent of shocking headlines, each more unbelievable than the last. The conflict has drawn in nations from around the world, creating a complex web of alliances and enmities. But even amidst the constant barrage of news, one story stands out. A whisper at first, then a roar. North Korean soldiers fighting for Putin's Russia are abandoning their posts. These soldiers, once symbols of unwavering loyalty, are now seeking a new path. They are surrendering to Ukrainian forces, seeking asylum, yearning for a taste of freedom they were never meant to experience. This act of defection is not just a personal choice, but a powerful statement against the regime they once served. This is not just another wartime defection. This is a crack in the facade of one of the world's most isolated and repressive regimes. The implications of such defections are profound, hinting at possible unrest within the ranks of North Korea's military. The presence of North Korean troops in Ukraine was a closely guarded secret, a testament to the clandestine alliances forged in the crucible of war. These alliances, often hidden from the public eye, reveal the intricate and shadowy nature of global politics. Their defection, however, is a secret that cannot be contained, a story whispered from trench to trench, spreading like wildfire through the ranks of both armies. The news of their defection has sparked conversations and speculations among soldiers and civilians alike. The world watches, captivated as the ramifications of this unprecedented event begin to unfold. News outlets around the globe are abuzz with this story, analyzing its potential impact on international relations. These are not ordinary soldiers. These are men forged in the fires of North Korea's brutal dictatorship, indoctrinated from birth to be loyal to the Kim regime. Their training and upbringing were designed to create unwavering loyalty, making their defection all the more significant. Their decision to defect is not one made lightly, not when the consequences of failure are so dire. The risks they face are immense, from retribution against their families to severe punishment if caught. And yet they choose freedom over fear, a testament to the indomitable spirit of those who dare to dream of a better life. Their courage serves as an inspiration to others who may be contemplating similar actions. The world holds its breath. The international community is on edge, waiting to see how this situation will evolve and what it will mean for the broader geopolitical landscape. What will become of these defectors? Will they find the freedom they seek, or will they face new challenges in their quest for a better life? What does their choice mean for the future of the war in Ukraine? Could this defection influence the strategies and morale of the involved forces? And what does it say about the stability of Kim Jong-un's iron grip on power? The defection of these soldiers could be a sign of cracks within the regime, raising questions about its future stability. The answers to these questions have the potential to reshape the geopolitical landscape, and the world watches with bated breath. The unfolding events could lead to significant shifts in alliances and power dynamics on the global stage.
A pact sealed in shadows. How did they get there? The story begins with a clandestine agreement, a handshake in the dark, far from the prying eyes of the world. The presence of North Korean soldiers on Ukrainian soil, a land thousands of miles from their isolated homeland, seems like a plot twist from a Cold War spy thriller. It's a scenario that defies conventional logic, raising questions about the motivations and machinations behind such a move. Yet beneath the surface of this seemingly bizarre alliance lies a calculated strategy, a web of shared interests and desperate gambles. This is not just a random act of military cooperation, it is a carefully orchestrated maneuver, a high-stakes game of geopolitical chess.
For Russia, bogged down in a costly and protracted war, the North Korean soldiers offered a much-needed influx of manpower, a way to bolster their depleted ranks without further alienating an already wary international community. The Kremlin saw an opportunity to reinforce its military efforts without drawing further ire from the global stage. For Kim Jong-un, the decision to send his troops to fight in a foreign war was a calculated risk, a move born out of necessity and a desire to strengthen ties with a powerful ally. It was a gamble that could either fortify his regime or lead to unforeseen consequences. Sanctions had crippled North Korea's economy, and the promise of Russian resources, perhaps even military hardware, was too tempting to resist. The economic desperation in Pyongyang made the offer of support from Moscow an irresistible lifeline. The lives of his soldiers were a small price to pay for a chance to secure his regime's survival. For Kim, the human cost was secondary to the potential benefits of solidifying an alliance with Russia.
The deal was likely struck in secrecy, a clandestine agreement hashed out in back channels, far from the prying eyes of the international community. These covert negotiations ensured that the details remained hidden, allowing both nations to maneuver without immediate scrutiny. No official announcements were made, no public pronouncements of solidarity. The silence was deafening, a deliberate choice to keep the world in the dark about the true nature of their cooperation. Instead, the soldiers were spirited away under the cover of darkness, loaded onto cargo ships and transported across the globe to a war they barely understood. Their journey was shrouded in mystery, a covert operation that left many questions unanswered. Their arrival in Ukraine was shrouded in secrecy, their presence only confirmed by grainy satellite images and intercepted communications. The world pieced together the puzzle through fragments of information, each piece revealing a bit more of the hidden narrative. They were deployed to the front lines, often alongside Russian troops or mercenaries from the Wagner Group, their distinctive language and appearance marking them as outsiders in a conflict that seemed to have little to do with their own country's fate. These soldiers, far from home, found themselves in the midst of a war that was as much about survival as it was about strategy. Cracks in the Iron Curtain, the price of allegiance. The North Korean soldiers arrived in Ukraine expecting a swift victory, a chance to prove their loyalty to their allies and return home with their share of the spoils. They had been promised a hero's welcome, medals, and a place of honor in their homeland. The propaganda machine had painted a picture of an easy conquest, a walkover that would showcase their might and resolve. Instead, they were met with fierce resistance, a determined enemy, and the harsh realities of a war that had already claimed countless lives. The Ukrainian forces, bolstered by their own sense of patriotism and the support of their people, fought back with a tenacity that the North Koreans had not anticipated.
The propaganda they had been fed about the weakness of the Ukrainian people and the invincibility of the Russian army crumbled in the face of relentless artillery barrages and the sight of their comrades falling on the battlefield. The reality of war was stark and unforgiving, a far cry from the glorified images they had been shown. The conditions they faced were a far cry from the heroic struggle depicted in North Korean propaganda. The soldiers found themselves in a foreign land, surrounded by hostility and uncertainty, their morale quickly eroding. They were ill-equipped, poorly supplied, and often thrown into battle with little regard for their safety. The lack of proper gear and ammunition made every skirmish a desperate fight for survival. The food was scarce, the medical care rudimentary, and the constant threat of death hung heavy in the air. The soldiers had to make do with whatever they could find, often scavenging for supplies in the ruins of war-torn towns.
For these soldiers, raised in one of the world's most isolated and impoverished nations, the experience of war was a brutal awakening. Disillusionment set in quickly. The stark contrast between their expectations and the grim reality they faced was a bitter pill to swallow. The promises of glory and reward rang hollow in the face of such suffering. The soldiers began to see through the lies they had been told, their faith in their leaders eroding with each passing day. The soldiers began to question the narrative they had been fed, to doubt the righteousness of their cause. They wondered why they were fighting, what they were truly fighting for, and whether the sacrifices they were making were worth it. They saw the toll the war was taking on the Ukrainian people, the destruction of cities and towns, the displacement of millions. The human cost of the conflict was staggering, and it weighed heavily on their consciences. And they began to see themselves not as liberators, but as invaders, pawns in a geopolitical game they did not understand. The realization that they were being used for someone else's agenda was a bitter one.
The seeds of dissent were sown, and they found fertile ground in the hearts and minds of soldiers who had already sacrificed so much for a regime that seemed to care little for their well-being. The disillusionment spread like wildfire, eroding the once unshakable loyalty to their leaders. The allure of freedom, once a distant dream, began to take root. The soldiers, weary from the constant fighting and the harsh living conditions, began to yearn for a way out. The stories of Ukrainian kindness, of civilians risking their lives to help captured soldiers, spread through the ranks, These acts of humanity stood in stark contrast to the brutality of the war, offering a glimmer of hope. The stories of Ukrainian kindness, of civilians risking their lives to help captured soldiers, spread through the ranks. These acts of humanity stood in stark contrast to the brutality of the war, offering a glimmer of hope. And with each passing day, the possibility of escape, of choosing a different path, became more and more tempting. The soldiers began to dream of a life beyond the battlefield, a life where they could be free from the chains of oppression and the horrors of war.